Hi, everybody. I'm here with Rob Cohen, and we're talking about recruiter enablement. Rob, give us a quick introduction to you.
Good afternoon. Hi, I'm Rob. I work for Philip Morris International, PMI, and up until recently, I've been responsible for all talent acquisition technology that touches our business, but from a business point of view. So although I'm a deeply technical person, I do sit within the business, so my role's generally around process.
Before that, give us the CV, because actually, you've done a lot of exciting things, and people will find a lot of people have said to me recently, "How do I get into recruiter enablement?" But also, people have said, "How do I get into recruitment technology and stuff like that?" Tell us about your journey.
So I don't think anyone ever plans on falling into recruitment tech or HR tech as a career. It's one of those things that generally happens. I started life in a deeply technical role with Procter and Gamble, looking after financial systems, specifically in a space where they were going through a number of acquisitions and various things. I then moved to Vodafone to do pretty similar jobs until this role was about a crossover between IT and HR, about bringing in a candidate relationship management tool. I'd always had an interest in HR, but never knew what space it was. I'd never heard of a candidate relationship management tool. This was back in 2010, 2011 time, and ended up falling in love with this space and realized there weren't a whole heap of technologists out there that wanted to be involved in HR. It generally seemed to be the other way around, that it was senior HR managers that were kind of lumbered with the technology aspect. They didn't really have an interest, but because they had experience, they were the de facto kind of tech managers as well as doing their day job. And I think certainly in the last 4 to 6 years, I've certainly seen an increase in people doing what I'm doing. So being responsible for that tech within an HR space, but sitting on the business side of things. I don't sit within IT. I have to play with whatever corporate framework is in place from our IT business partners. But equally, I have a deep knowledge of business process and the ways that companies operate to be able to understand what tech to leverage and when.
And you spent time on the other side as well. You worked for Avature for a few years.
So yeah, I've worked for Avature. I worked for Talent Collective, the AMS consulting division. This is now the third time I've kind of been on the vendor side of things. And I enjoy being on both sides, but there's pros and cons to both.
Okay, so let's talk about recruiter enablement. What's it to you? What's your experiences in this area? What's the objectives, etc.?
So apart from you guys, I don't think a lot of people are doing heaps in this space. To me, recruiter enablement is about providing a toolkit or the tools to recruiters to be able to do their job in a more, I don't want to say automated fashion, but certainly to a greater quality, to get better results, and essentially leveraging what's out there, whether it's a mishmash of different technologies or whether you're trying to umbrella it. It's getting the most out of job advertising, getting the most out of your sourcing channels, writing proper job descriptions that are consistent with high quality, that still meet briefs. And it's about giving recruiters or essentially anyone within that TA space the tools that they need to do their job easily.
What sort of involvement have you had in, typically when you're doing things in this area, are you spotting opportunities for enhancements, or is the TA team coming to you going, "Hey, look, we need to do this better. What do you think?" Like, how does it work?
It's a bit of both. And I think I also have the added advantage of sitting within a big organization that has a COE in place that ultimately defines the strategy that the delivery teams need to focus on. I kind of bridge that gap. So I get visibility to what the COE are looking for or trying to achieve. And I also am close enough to the coalface and the actual recruitment teams that are doing the work. Often it's a case of, "Rob, wouldn't it be great if we could have a field here, or can we report on this? How would you get this metric?" Or it's someone saying, our strategy is changing. We're moving in this direction. This is something we need to fill this gap in our process. Go and find a solution. Or it's even something that I'm self-discovering and going, hold on, we've just developed this whole process that has 36 process steps in to get from A to B. But actually, step 7, 8, 9, we could do with this, or we can put a person or a process in place to make that more consistent. So I think it's three facets. It's either the strategy, it's the operational delivery teams, or it's me as kind of that high level view working out what we can do.
There's been a lot of changes in technology over the last couple of years. What are the most exciting things that you're seeing that you think you've either started already making use of, or you're excited to start making use of in terms of like types of innovation?
There is so much that I'd like to grab. And again, this is now the disadvantage of being in a big corporate that's got a global footprint, that what I have to do has to be applicable globally. There is stuff coming, particularly when it comes to assessment and selection. We know that interviews are the weakest part of any selection process. If we can get quantifiable results that are based on fact about the candidate that's sitting in front of you, to be able to compare apples to apples properly, for me, that assessment space is the most intrinsic, where there's some good change. Gone are the days of having to do 500 questionnaires to try and get a job. There's gamification coming in, and I know that's been around for a long time, but it's got really good, particularly with like the role playing scenarios and things. And then, as everyone's talking about, it's generative AI. If you can have content that almost generates itself, whereas you may have a standard format for a job description that's used internally, but actually the skills to transfer that into a really engaging job advert is something that recruiters don't tend to have. They have to complete a template that has these 6 sections, and they're copying and pasting. Actually being able to use generative AI rather than content writers and copywriters to come up with those really engaging messages that can stay on brand, still meet your guidelines, but entice candidates. I think that's a really exciting piece, and it's not that big a jump. I know years ago we were talking about video job adverts, and they kind of came, and they do exist, but they're certainly not leveraged. People like reading content, and it's about getting the right content to the right audience.
I enjoyed everything you just said, but thinking to one thing you said at the big, like early in that answer, it was around interviews being like the weakest part of the selection process, and I hadn't really thought about it in those terms. It's a very interesting way of thinking about it. I wonder what actually is the purpose of an interview, because if it's just like a chemistry meeting, that's rammed with bias, right? I mean, it's not. Yeah, what's the purpose of an interview?
I'm not going to name the person that told me this, but I went through interview training a long time ago, and one of the people that was one of the trainers said that an interview is actually a moron test. And it's your ability to check, could I work as this person's boss, as this person's peer, or even work for them? Am I hiring them to be my boss? And essentially, I know you called it a chemistry test, but once they've got to interview, they've got in front of you, their CV's been assessed, their experience is obviously aligned, their qualifications and experience matches up to what you're looking for. They've probably undergone one or several assessment tests. That interview is just the rubber seal of a person's character, unless you're going into technical interviews and you want to extrapolate various information. But generally, I've always used it as an opportunity to really get to know the person that sat in front of me. Maybe wrongly, I'm a pretty informal interviewer. I'm not, these are a list of questions I need to get through, and this is what I want to achieve. I just need to know, does this person's mentality and their kind of cultural background fit what I'm looking for? But there's all sorts of biases then that come along with that.
That's the thing. I agree. I agree with what you just said. But on the other side, I'm thinking, but hang on a second. If you're just checking if this person's a prat or not, then I mean, a prat to you is not necessarily a prat to me, and so it's a very, very grey area, isn't it? This whole
I guess ultimately,
interview.
if I'm the hiring manager, I'm the one that has to work with whoever's there. I think that's the most important thing. Do you click? Can you have a professional relationship with that person?
You've typically worked for bigger organizations. If there's like a medium-sized organization that has not really done anything to enable their recruiters properly, like where'd you start? What's the diagnosis? What's the like? How'd you go about it? What would
That's
you
the
recommend?
dream. I'd love to work with a medium-sized organization that only has one geographical kind of point of reference. Um, Blank canvas to start from scratch, building that sort of recruitment organization from a tech point of view. For me, it's about getting those basics right. We need to ensure that consistency is achieved across your hiring processes, whether you're hiring for, I don't know, retail and operations versus senior execs. We need to understand what those workflows look like, and getting, and this is probably where my background does come into it. For me, the applicant tracking system has to be the core of whatever you're doing, because that's where you're pushing jobs out and you're retrieving applications. So if you can get a basic process there, then you can start adding the bells and whistles to be able to automate your job postings, or write better job adverts, or automate your assessment pools to handle volume. And then again, you also have things like AI matching and various other things that could come into play as either bolt-ons or from the ATS provider. But that ATS has to be the core of your talent acquisition lifecycle.
I've got a personal view, which is that the advent of this recruitment CRM as a separate technology and not something that the ATS has just built really shafted the talent acquisition tech stack from the start of Aperture right until today. It's probably quite a controversial point, and a lot of people will disagree with my point. I would suggest those people have got a large financial reason to disagree with my point. But honestly, the split between the ATS and the CRM, I think, was like a hand grenade into the recruitment tech stack personally. Interested to know your thoughts on
So
that.
this is really interesting. I think I'm aligned with your way of thinking, that actually, and I think I've understood that you're suggesting that the CRM and the ATS should be separate, rather than the ATS trying to achieve CRM functionality.
Actually, no.
And if that is the
No,
case,
no.
oh, you're saying
I'm
the
actually,
opposite,
I'm
that the
actually, I'm actually,
CRM should be a bolt-on.
I'm saying it should have been one tech. It should all have been one technology. A person should be a person.
Oh,
Managing
so
the workflow, managing the person, the profile should all have been one technology. When I worked in a recruitment agency like a long time ago, an ATS and a CRM was one thing.
no,
It was
and
the
I
one thing.
appreciate that. But I think so. I'm an advocate of separate systems, and I'll give you reasoning. And even if those systems are both the same provider, and I did it with Avature, that actually companies either started with Avature as a CRM and then went into the ATS space, and you then have the option: do you combine and just have one instance, or do you have that separate CRM instance and your ATS instance? And I'm an advocate for the separates, and the reason being, although you're a person, you can be distinctly separate. You can be an applicant to a specific requisition that you've applied to. You've said, I want to apply to that senior analyst job in that organization. Or you become a lead. And maybe we don't need to have the same information across both. I only need to know that actually you're interested in jobs in Liverpool in this function and you have this background, and you'll live as a lead in a CRM system. And the reason I want you separate is because I can target you in different ways. I can target you as an applicant that's given us a clear statement of intent, or actually we can send those nice soft campaigns to you as a lead in a separate system. I'm a real if and there are systems out there that differentiate really nicely. So you can have that one box that considers leads and considers applicants as separate entities with different data privacy agreements and various other things. But generally, if you're working out of one box, you have one data retention policy, you have one privacy agreement, and actually by splitting the two boxes into distinct platforms, you can go quite far. My only other thing is you need to have a real tight integration between the two. So you need to be able to send those silver medalists back to your CRM. And equally, I don't want a lead having to apply the same way as a cold candidate. I want to remove the friction from that journey and let them apply with what we already know. Why do I need them to give me their work experience again? Because they've given it to us as a lead in the CRM system. But I think the data models between the two are different enough to warrant having different platforms.
Yeah, okay. Interesting argument, a valid perspective on this. I think it's probably the biggest mess in recruitment, the way that it's been deployed. But I do take on board the conceptual reasons for that. So very valid.
My only other piece of advice is don't try and do both at the same time.
I completely agree with that. Rob, thanks so much for your time. Great to talk to you today. Great to get your insights, and talk to you soon.
Real pleasure. Thanks a lot, Adam. Have a good afternoon.